Norway 1942. The mountains of Telemark were cloaked in snow so thick it seemed to swallow sound. Beneath the icy peaks, the Vemork hydroelectric plant crouched against the river like a black tooth, humming with a power that the world had only begun to understand. For the Germans, it was more than a factory. It was the key to producing heavy water, the essential component for nuclear weapons. For the Allies, it was a nightmare that had to be stopped. At the edge of the plateau, Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg and a small team of Norwegian Commandos crouched in the snow, watching the plant through binoculars. They were far from home, far from warmth, but every man knew why they were there. If the Nazis succeeded in producing heavy water, the world might be plunged into a war far deadlier than the one already raging. The mission was nearly impossible. Guards patrolled the facility like predatory animals, searchlights swept the grounds in slow arcs, and dogs sniffed the icy air with uncanny precision. But Ronneberg had been trained to move like a shadow, to think like the enemy, and to survive where ordinary soldiers would fail. For weeks, the team had skied across frozen valleys, slept in snow caves, and rehearsed every move until it became instinct. They had discovered a small, unused cable shaft that ran from the forested cliffs directly to the factory, an old maintenance route long abandoned. It was dangerous and narrow, but it was the only way to approach the plant undetected. The Commandos had practiced crawling through its icy passage for hours, memorizing every twist, every metal brace, every shadowed corner. Supplies were meager. The men ate snow, rationed every scrap of food, and endured nights where the temperature dropped so low that their breath froze in midair. Yet in the silence of the frozen wilderness, they sharpened their senses. Every snap of ice, every distant howl of a dog became a signal to halt, to hide, to survive. Inside the plant, massive tanks of heavy water glimmered in the pale light, guarded by machines, men, and the unyielding will of an occupying army. To destroy them, Ronneberg and his team had to be precise, silent, and faster than the eyes that scanned the corridors above. One mistake, one misstep, could mean death or capture and the ruin of the mission. As the moon rose above the mountains, the Commandos made their move. They slipped through the snow, their bodies low, skis cutting silent tracks that the storm would soon erase. They reached the entrance to the cable shaft, the narrow metal tunnel that led them closer to the heart of the factory. One by one, they disappeared into the darkness, carrying explosives, determination, and the weight of an entire nation's hopes on their shoulders. Ronneberg paused at the shaft's mouth, listening to the hum of turbines and the distant voices of guards. His fingers traced the explosives tucked into his pack. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Beyond the cold metal walls lay the machinery that could decide the future of the war. The fate of Europe depended on what they were about to do, and there was no turning back. In that frozen, silent night, the mission truly began. They moved like winter ghosts. Inside the cable shaft, the air smelled of iron and old oil. Their carbide lamp threw thin slices of light that trembled across rivets and frozen condensate. The shaft narrowed until the men had to curl their bodies to inch through, packs scraped, and the metal sang under their palms. Time was a private thing in that hour. Each man folded it into the rhythm of his breath and the soft tick of boots on iron. Outside, the night kept its hush, but inside the plant, the turbines thudded like a living thing, a monstrous heart they meant to wound. When they slipped into the service corridors, the world changed from open white to claustrophobic shadow. Pipes ran like veins along ceilings, catwalks arced overhead. The heavy water tanks rose, squat and silent, like sleeping beasts ringed in metal. Ronneberg glanced at each man, faces pinched with cold and concentration, fingers steady despite the numbness. They split into pairs, precise, rehearsed choreography, each team with its assigned cuts and charges. The plan was elegant in its economy: minimal force, maximal effect, leave the plant damaged, but not indiscriminately wrecked, so the Germans would never know exactly what had hit them. Everything that could have gone wrong almost did. The first near disaster came in the shape of a single, ordinary wrench. One of the younger Commandos, nerves taut from hunger and cold, knocked it from a maintenance shelf. It clattered across concrete with a sound sharp enough to make them flinch. A pause, a heartbeat where their training and courage collided with an animal panic. Then Ronneberg moved, all low motion and quick thinking. He threw a folded piece of cloth so it landed at the edge of the beam above, drawing the eye of the patrolling guard who passed by moments later. The guard looked up, puzzled, muttered something to himself, and shuffled on. Small theatrics had kept them invisible. Inside the heavy water chamber they worked with a surgeon's care. Charges were strapped at structural joints, fuses measured in inches so the timing would be right for a distant, controlled blast. They wrapped wires in oilcloth and tucked detonators behind valves where the room's geometry hid them. Every touch had the weight of consequence, every breath felt like a borrowed commodity. For a while, the only sound was the low, chewing hum of turbines and the whisper of their own gloves. Then a complication. A night shift engineer, a man whose job had him patrolling with the casual confidence of routine, rounded a corner earlier than their intel had predicted. He froze when he saw a shadow move too quickly between the tanks. For a savage second, the whole enterprise balanced on a knife edge, a wavering of light, a held breath, an identity that did not exist. Ronneberg stepped forward without breaking stride, and in halting German and louder Norwegian, pretended to be a maintenance worker sent to check a valve. The man, suspicious but tired, barked a question into his radio. Ronneberg's companion pointed out a false fault they had prepared earlier, a hiss of leaking steam created by a small chemical they had hidden in a drain. It was enough. The engineer grunted, wrote a note, and walked away to find the supervisor. Their hearts did not start beating again until his boots faded down the corridor. One by one, the charges were set. Yet as they finished, a new danger made itself known. The cold was stealing the temper of their fuses. Metal contracts in deep freeze, timing that had been calculated in a warm storeroom, seemed to shrink in the real, brutal air. The measuring marks on the fuses no longer matched the readings they had trained with. For the first time that night, an ugly, technical doubt crept into the mission. A premature detonation could kill them all. A late one could let German repair teams arrive and capture evidence. Ronneberg snatched a wire, then another, and rewired 2 charges to a single, longer fuse, an improvisation born of experience and the kind of calm that only comes from knowing mistakes are lethal. They made for the exit with the economy of men who had already rehearsed what would happen if they were caught. Silence, no signaling, self-sacrifice over exposure. But the plant was a maze that seemed to close on itself. Above them, a boot scuffed, lights clicked to life in sequence. Someone had discovered somewhere a door ajar that ought to have been shut. The team's radio received nothing but static. London was distant and blind. For a breathless minute, they debated abandoning the charges and melting back into the night. To leave would be to waste everything. To stay might be to trade a triumph for a tomb. Ronneberg chose the narrowest gamble. He signaled the team to cut away and form a staggered exit. They would split. Some would draw patrols by slipping through service passages and making small mechanical disturbances. The rest would slip into the shaft and begin the long crawl to the surface. As they moved, a searchlight swung, a blade of white that scraped the plant's face and came terrifyingly close. The men flattened into shadows, the metal biting at their shoulders, breath fogging like ghosts in glass. For all the planning and rehearsal, the mission still asked for luck as its final coin. At the shaft's mouth they waited while the storm outside picked up, the wind beginning to rattle the exposed pipes like a coming applause. The fuse was lit in the quiet of a heartbeat, but not yet with the noisy flourish of victory. They retreated into the dark, each step dragging them away from the machines they had betrayed, toward the uncertain mercy of snow and night. Behind them, in the belly of the plant, the charges lay in patient silence, a promise set to explode the next chapter of their lives into history or into ash. The blast came in the early hours, just as the first pale light of dawn began to bleed over the ridges. It was not the fiery roar of a Hollywood explosion. It was a controlled, calculated eruption that sent metal twisting and water churning. The heavy water tanks, the very core of Germany's nuclear ambitions, had been destroyed. Sparks flew, pipes buckled, and the hum of machinery died in sudden, absolute silence. Ronneberg and his team, already far down the frozen ravine, felt the shockwave more than they heard it. Relief washed over them, but there was no time to celebrate. The Germans would respond quickly. Patrols would comb the area, searchlights would pierce the snow, and every misstep could be fatal. They pressed onward, moving like shadows over the plateau, the storm now their ally rather than their adversary. Snow masked their tracks, muffled their movement, and stole them from the eyes of any pursuers. Crossing the frozen river was the final test. Ice groaned beneath them as they inched across, one by one, careful not to betray their passage. Ropes were tied, poles tested, and each step was measured. For a moment, the wind carried their names in whispers, but the mountains demanded silence. At last they reached the extraction point, a safe house arranged by the Norwegian resistance. Exhaustion had settled into their bones, but each man knew they had succeeded. The sabotage was not just a tactical victory, it was a strategic masterstroke. German plans were delayed, troops diverted, and the Allies could advance on a weakened front in Norway and across Europe. The mission had saved countless lives, though no one outside this small circle would ever know exactly how or why. Months later, the world would learn the story of the Norwegian Commandos and their audacious raid. The gunners of Telemark, as they came to be called, had pulled off a feat that combined intelligence, courage, and ingenuity. Ronneberg would recall the frozen nights, the creaking metal of the shaft, and the moment the turbines fell silent. He would remember the terror, the exhilaration, and the quiet camaraderie of men bound together by impossible circumstances. The brilliance of the mission lay not just in destruction, but in subtlety. Every movement had been calculated, every detail accounted for, every risk weighed. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. History would remember Vemork not only for the heavy water it produced, but for the shadows that danced through its corridors one frozen night, and the men who bent the course of war with nothing more than courage, patience, and an audacious plan. In the end, Joachim Ronneberg and his team disappeared into history like the ghosts they had become, silent, unseen, but leaving behind a legacy that would echo long after the snow had melted.